Yep. Happy Masters Sunday in that live from Augusta, Georgia. Time to talk about some of the spring games from yesterday. We're going to talk about Georgia and Alabama's spring games from yesterday. But good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. The rumors are true. I'm Uncle Lou, live for you on LouTube today. Appreciate you watching. Georgia and Alabama both held their spring games yesterday. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about these. I'm probably going to do another video later on this afternoon about a couple other spring games that I watched yesterday, including Ohio State, which was pitiful. It was a pillow fight, no tackling. I mean, it was just a complete waste of time. That game had no business being on TV. But anyway, let's start with Georgia. I was not that impressed offensively with Georgia, to be honest. I was expecting more. Now, I'll preface this by saying the same thing I say every time I talk about any spring game at all. You can't draw a straight line from what you see in the spring to the fall. We all know that. What you see in the fall is not necessarily what you're going to get, or what you see in the spring game is not necessarily what you're going to get in the fall, right? And some teams have more questions coming into spring practice than others. In the case of Georgia, a returning quarterback in Carson Beck, a returning head coach in Kirby Smart, both coordinators return. There's not a whole lot of questions really that you're looking for to be answered in Georgia's spring game. So what you're looking for primarily, no injuries, right? And they accomplished that. And that's the case in every spring game, in every practice, in every game ever played, regardless of age or level of football. We don't ever want injuries. So Georgia escaped any major injuries yesterday, but I was expecting the offense to look a little more crisp, I think, yesterday, especially considering the fact that, at least in my opinion, if you're looking for a weakness, which I don't really think there is one on Georgia's defense, but I guess the area that has the least amount of strength would be like the corners at Georgia with, Everett and Julian Humphrey and some of those younger guys, Ellis Robinson. I don't know. I wasn't overly impressed with Georgia's passing game yesterday. Carson Beck, one thing that stood out to me, he had 5 passes knocked down at the line of scrimmage. Now, this is something you kind of expected a little bit when Stetson Bennett was quarterback because he was on the smaller side. Carson Beck is 6'4". There's no reason any 6'4" quarterback should ever have 5 passes knocked down in a day. Ever. Especially in a spring game where you're not really allowed to rush the quarterback. I mean, technically you are. You just can't sack him or touch him or whatever. But that creates sort of a false bubble around the QB. It's just odd to me that a 6'4" quarterback would have 5 passes deflected at the line of scrimmage. That tells me that's something they need to work with him on. And again, I'm not an X's and O's or an analytics type of guy. I can't sit here and tell you it's got something to do with his arm height when he releases the ball, and I don't know. All I know is it's not good to have 5 passes knocked down at the line of scrimmage in one game, and when you're 6'4", that shouldn't be happening. Another area that I still hope we see some improvement when it comes to Carson Beck, and you're splitting hair. Carson Beck had a great year last year. I love Carson Beck. There's been times in the past where I've been extremely critical of Georgia quarterbacks that I didn't think were up to par as far as where they needed to be to play quarterback at Georgia. That's not the case with Carson Beck. I'm happy with Carson Beck. He had an amazing year last year. You can make the argument he had the best year last year of any quarterback ever in Georgia history. So I'm happy with Georgia quarterback Carson Beck in terms of the numbers he put up last year. And I don't have really a lot of doubt, question, or concern about what he'll do in 2024. But when it comes to areas to improve, the deep ball, he didn't throw a great deep ball last year. One of the areas where Georgia, I think, needs to improve in 2024 over 2023 is sort of explosive plays through the air. They didn't have a whole lot. And most of the ones that they did have were short passes that turned into long runs by tight ends, wide receivers, or running backs. Not a lot of explosive down the field plays from Carson Beck last year. Attempted some, had a hard time hitting receivers. When he did hit them, hard time hanging on the ball. Talking to you, Arian Smith. And it seemed a little off again yesterday. Now, to give Carson Beck the benefit of the doubt, if that's what you want to do, there are several new wide receivers, and so maybe timing is still an issue. I don't know, but it needs to get worked out by the fall. I was impressed with Dylan Bell. He looks really, really good at the wide receiver position, and he's kind of a utility player. I mean, he can play out wide. He can play in the slot. He can play in the backfield as a running back. Georgia used him a lot of different ways last year as sort of a reserve player, sort of a change of place player that they would kind of put in spots here and there. I think he'll have a largely increased role in 2024. He looked really good. Dominic Lovett looked really, really good. The transfer wide receiver from Miami had a couple of plays yesterday. What's his name? Colby Young, I think is his name. A 6'4", big, tall guy that can go over the middle and catch passes, jump balls, 50-50 balls down the sideline, that kind of thing. Something that Georgia kind of lacked last year. They got a little bit of that with Marcus Jack Saint, but he was more of a possession receiver. I liked what I saw yesterday from Colby Young. Moving over to the running backs at Georgia, this has been a theme for Georgia in spring games, really since Kirby Smart has got to Athens, but especially over the last few years. They just don't run the ball in the spring game. If you watch Georgia spring game trying to figure out anything about the running backs, it's really hard to do because Carson Beck, for example, threw the ball 45 times yesterday. Not to mention Gunnar Stockton then throwing the ball another 40 times or whatever. Georgia threw almost 90 passes yesterday in the spring game. There's never going to be a game under any scenario in any circumstances where Georgia or Carson Beck throws the ball 45 or 50 times a game. It's just not going to happen. For whatever reason, they make the decision not to run the ball a lot in the spring game. Probably has to do with the health of the running backs. But I did think what little we saw of the running backs looked good yesterday. ETN looked good in a Georgia helmet. He had a couple of pass catches out of the backfield, which was good to see. That's something in an area I think that Georgia was missing last year. I mentioned Dillon Bell playing some running back last year. That was the primary reason why. You go back to 2016 when Kirby Smart first got to Georgia. Almost every single year, he's had a DeAndre Swift type of running back, what we would sort of used to classify as maybe a third down back. A little bit undersized, but a really fast, quick, shifty, speedy guy that can catch passes out of the backfield. DeAndre Swift for his first couple of years. Then we had James Cook for a couple of years after that. Then we had Kenny McIntosh for a couple of years after that. Last year, we didn't really have that type of running back. And while I don't think ETN necessarily fits the mold exactly of a DeAndre Swift or a James Cook or a Kenny McIntosh, I think he's the closest thing Georgia has had to that since any of those three guys. And it was good to see him catch some passes out of the backfield. I think he'll be really, really good. Roderick Robinson looked amazing. Georgia's got a couple of young running backs that have sort of battled injuries their first year or so on campus and on the team at UGA. And it appears as though a lot of those guys are starting to get healthy. We didn't see Branson Robinson yesterday, who is expected to be fully healthy by the start of the season. But you saw Roderick Robinson and Andrew Paul, and they run mean. They're kind of like bowling ball type running backs is how I would best describe them. They don't necessarily have the breakaway speed or the home run speed. I wouldn't expect to see very many 80-yard touchdown runs out of Roderick Robinson or Andrew Paul. But they're tough physical runners between the tackles. If ETN can come along and sort of complement that with a little bit more speed and maybe some passing ability on third down situations or out of the backfield in the flat, motioned out, that kind of thing, I think Georgia's running backs will be a lot closer to where they were a few years ago as opposed to where they were at last year, where they were really hampered, honestly, by injuries and just sort of lack of the type of player that they're used to having. Over on the defensive side of the ball, I'm trying to tamper my expectations when it comes to Georgia's inside linebackers, but they look unbelievable. CJ Allen, it's hard for me to explain how good I think CJ Allen can be. Now, I don't think he's quite as fast, straight line speed as maybe a Roquan Smith or a Nakobe Dean, but he's bigger and he packs a much bigger punch, and he's fast enough. And you pair him with Smile Munden, who is a speedster, Raylan Wilson, who has looked good when he played both last year and so far this spring. And it looks to me like Georgia has an inside linebacker rotation similar to what they had in 2021 when they won their first of two national titles, when they sort of had a sort of a three rotation deal going on at inside linebacker. All three of those inside linebackers ended up getting drafted the following year. I think Georgia's inside linebacker room is on pace to equal what we saw in 2021 out of those guys. Safety, not a concern at all. Malachi Starks didn't play yesterday. He's an All-American. He's probably the second best safety in all of college football. You can argue with your mama about him and Caleb Downs. You can go back and forth however you want. I would take either one of them on my team in a heartbeat. They're both All-Americans. They're both going to be playing on Sundays. Malachi Starks will be a junior. Caleb Downs will be a sophomore. Of course, has transferred up to Ohio State. Those are the two best safeties in the country, if you ask me. Malachi Starks had some off-season surgery. Didn't play yesterday. He was dressed out and did warm up, and he has been going through drills in spring. He'll be fine for the fall, but he didn't play. We got to see a lot of KJ Bolden, highly rated 5-star guy. I think he's going to play a lot. We got to see some Ellis Robinson outside at corner. Corner is kind of the concern for me. I had two main concerns. Well, I guess three if you really want to break it down, about Georgia heading into the spring game. I don't have any concerns about Georgia offensively. I just don't. I think they're going to be one of the best offenses in all of college football again. That was the case last year. I expect it to be the case again this year. I think they're going to be top 5, top 10 in every single offensive category that matters, from total yards to points per game to rushing yards to passing yards, the whole deal. I think they're going to be fine offensively. Just weird to say as a Georgia fan, because for a long time it was the exact opposite. My questions about Georgia heading into the spring: corner and outside pass rush. And those questions might be answered. Mykel Williams made me happy yesterday. He was a guy that, to me, sort of disappeared last year and disappointed. He was a freshman All-American a couple of years ago, has all the potential in the world, was poised to be the next great outside pass rusher at UGA. And to me, last year was a disappointment for him. Now, we can point to a million reasons why that might be. Not here to do that. It's just my opinion. I'm not saying he was bad or terrible last year. He wasn't as good as I hoped he would be last year. I think he needs to take that next step this year. And from what we saw in the spring game, he's well on his way to doing that. I was very impressed with what I saw out of him. You got some young guys, some freshmen on the outside there. Jalen Walker looks really, really good. The defensive line is where I would sort of say maybe the third issue would be. Now, there's a ton of returning starters, experience, and talent along that defensive line. I still don't think we have just, that first round type talent on the defensive line, sort of just the dominating presence on the interior of that defensive line that we had in 2021 and 2022 with players like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter and things like that. But I think as a group, they can be a decent unit. They do need to play better than they played last year. That's just a fact. You go back and watch the SEC championship game, and while there's never any one reason that a team loses a game, if you want to focus on one reason why Georgia couldn't beat Alabama last year in the SEC championship game, to me, it was because they got dominated defensively along the lines of scrimmage. Alabama's offensive line completely manhandled them in that game last year. They've got to play better in the bigger games, better against the run, better between the tackles. We'll see if they can do that. Again, it's not going to be the case where you got a bunch of new players come in or some some 5-star freshman's going to take off this. It's going to be the same players we saw last year. They're just going to have to play better. It's hard for me to judge lines of scrimmage in a spring game because the rules are so weird in terms of touching the quarterback. So like pass rush, it's almost impossible to judge that. I thought overall the defense played better than the offense yesterday in a spring game. And even though that may sound normal, right? You think of Georgia, you think defense, you think Kirby Smart, you think defense. Georgia's offense have dominated these spring games in years past. That was not the case yesterday. So again, am I making too much of the fact that Carson Beck didn't wow me yesterday? Am I not making enough of the fact that maybe the defense is? I don't know. Again, it's a spring game. These are just my observations on the game. Am I higher or lower on what I think about Georgia heading into next season today than I was before yesterday's spring game? I'm exactly the same, to be honest with you. I haven't changed at all. I still think Georgia's one of the best 2 or 3 teams in the country. I think they'll be ranked in the top 3 in every single preseason ranking that comes out. Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia, in any order you want to put them in, I think are or should be the 3 highest ranked teams heading into next season. I didn't see anything yesterday from Georgia that would make me change my mind. On to Alabama. Start with the positives with Alabama. I think Alabama might have the best running game in the country this year. Now, are they going to rush for the most yards? I don't know. You got teams that still run triple options and do all kinds of weird things. So I'm not here to make any kind of prediction that Alabama's going to, run for 300 yards a game and finish first in rushing per game in all of college football, or they're going to average 8 yards a carry. I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, for my money, what I've seen so far this spring and what I know about Alabama and how talented they are up front and just the way they've recruited and all that kind of thing, combined with what I saw yesterday from those 3 running backs, Alabama might be the best running football team in the country. We know what Jalen Milroe can do with his legs. We saw him do it all of last year. And any criticisms that anybody has of Jalen Milroe, myself included, and I'll get to some in a few minutes, they don't have anything to do with his ability to run. He's one of the best running quarterbacks, if not the best running quarterback in all of college football. He's big, strong, fast, and elusive. What else would you ask for when it comes to anybody running the ball, a running quarterback included? What I saw yesterday from Jam Miller, Young, and Justice Haynes, which I'm assuming are their 1, 2, 3 running back combination. I don't know who's technically RB1 and who's technically RB3, and I don't know that it really matters anymore in today's college football. Most teams that are any good at all rotate at least 2, usually 3, sometimes 4 running backs sort of in and out interchangeably, right? Those 3 guys all look like all Americans. But Jam Miller had some. Now to be fair, I guess there were some huge holes for them to run through, and we'll get to that in a second. Alabama's defense and what we saw yesterday and what that might mean for them defensively. But those three running backs look really, really good. Justice Haynes, Jam Miller, and I'm forgetting the other guy's first name, but his last name is Young. They look really, really good. No problem snapping the ball, at least for Alabama's first team offense. I did notice some problems with what I guess was the second or third string center. Now, no terribly bad snaps, but a lot of low snaps from the second or third center. But whoever, they fixed the center problem. Their center from last year couldn't snap the ball in a shotgun to save his life. It was frustrating for Alabama fans. He transferred out to Ohio State, so they have a new center. They appeared to have fixed that problem. Every snap that I noticed from Alabama's spring game yesterday from the starting center appeared to be right on time and right on the money. So they fixed that problem. The offensive line, I thought, played well. Wide receiver, the one that came down from Washington, is it Jeremy or Jamama? Well, he's got a weird first name. Bernard is his last name. I thought he looked really, really good. He made several big catches from multiple quarterbacks, and he's obviously got familiarity with Kalen DeBoer's offense. He was at Washington last year, and he looked really, really good. Prentice made a couple of good catches at the wide receiver position for Bama yesterday. I saw the tight end make a catch or two. I still don't think they're anywhere close at the wide receiver position to where they were at in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020 when they had guys like Devontae Smith and Jaden Waddle and Jamison Williams and Mechie and all those guys. I don't think they have a group of wide receivers that is that good. But I do think the wide receivers they have, at least from what I saw yesterday, look better than what they have had maybe the last couple of years. So it looks like a little bit of an improvement to me at the wide receiver position. Now, how much is that going to matter with Jalen Milroe at quarterback? Let's get to that. Now, as far as him running the ball yesterday, he did run the ball a few times, and it's really hard to judge anything, not just about Jalen Milroe, but about any running quarterback in spring games because of the way the rules are, right? You can't tackle a quarterback in these spring games. And a lot of times, as soon as a defender gets within a yard or two of the quarterback, they're blowing the whistle, they're stopping the play, all that kind of thing. So Milroe got credit with a lot of, 4-yard runs, 6-yard runs, 8-yard runs, whatever the case, where for all we know, he could have spun around the guy, juked the guy, ran over the guy, ran by the guy, whatever. And maybe it's an 80-yard touchdown. And because we've seen Milroe do that in live game action last year. You didn't get to see that yesterday in the spring game because of the way the rules are. They'd blow the whistle and the thing would be dead. But again, I don't need to watch an Alabama spring game to try to figure out if Jalen Milroe has the ability to run the ball. We know he does. He's, again, probably the best running quarterback in all of college football. The questions for me and for a lot of people when it comes to Jalen Milroe is, can he throw the ball? And more specifically, can he read a defense? Can he go through progressions? Can he make the 10, the 15, the 20, the 25-yard throws? Because he had some pretty deep balls last year. He had some great 40, 50, 60-yard balls last year. He seemed to struggle, number one, when he was under pressure, and number two, when the coverage was tight and he had to go through his progressions and make reads in the 15 to 20-yard range. That appears to still be a problem. He completed his first 2 passes yesterday. One of them was a beautiful throw. He rolled out to his left, threw the ball back to his right on sort of a corner fade route, and he dropped the ball right down in a bucket. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better throw. The second completion he had was like a 45-yard bomb basically down the seam to a wide open wide receiver. There was nobody anywhere near him. The wide receiver had to stop on the 5-yard line, turn around, and jump to make the catch. So it wasn't a great throw. It was a great play. 40-yard play to a wide open wide receiver down inside the 5-yard line, but it wasn't a great throw. But he completed his first 2 passes. He then missed on his next 5. So he was 2 for 2. Then he was 2 for 7. And then he completed his last pass of the game to finish 3 of 8 passing. That's under 50% in a game where no one's allowed to touch him. And even that last pass to get him to 3 of 8, it was 3rd and 14. And the defense, of course, was playing sort of a 15-yard cushion coverage, right? You give up anything underneath. You don't want to give up the first down. And he completed like a simple little 8-yard hook route to a wide open wide receiver who was immediately tackled short of the first down. So I didn't see, again, just like I said at the beginning of the video, he's only been working with Kalen DeBoer for a few weeks, right? We've seen Kalen DeBoer sort of turn Penix into a miracle maker at the quarterback position. And for all we know, maybe he does that with Jalen Milroe over the next couple of months leading up to the start of the season. But if you went into yesterday's spring game expecting to see any improvement from Jalen Milroe in terms of his ability to throw the ball, we didn't see that. He looked like the same old Jalen Milroe yesterday. Again, I'm not telling you to draw a line from that to the fall, and that's the Jalen Milroe you're going to get. That's not what I'm saying. I don't know what he's going to look like in the fall. I have my opinions on what I think he might or might not look like in the fall. All we can go on is what we saw yesterday, and he looked like the same old Milroe. He had a hard time completing passes, 3 of 8, less than 50% in a spring game where you're not allowed to touch the quarterback. Alabama's defense. If I was an Alabama fan, this would be what was most concerning to me, would be Alabama's defense yesterday. I don't know how they're running their practices. I don't know how Kalen DeBoer runs his practices. Hell, I don't know how Nick Saban ran his practices. I don't know what the differences are between how Kalen DeBoer is running his practices and how Nick Saban used to run his practices. I don't know if they're not spending enough time tackling. I don't know if they're not doing enough full contact. I don't know what the problem is, but there was clearly a problem yesterday with Alabama's defense versus what we're used to seeing an Alabama defense look like. First play of the game was a 25-yard run. There wasn't a defender within 10 yards of the running back until he was 20 yards downfield. No one touched him. And that happened multiple times. Holes that you could drive a semi-truck through on handoffs, off the left tackle or the right tackle. The defense was getting blown off the ball. Linebackers out of position, missed tackles, missed assignments, poor angles. It didn't look good defensively for Bama. That doesn't mean anything for the fall. I'm not here to project what this means for the fall. I'm here to tell you what I saw yesterday. I've watched a lot of Alabama spring games. I've watched a lot of Alabama actual games. Alabama's defense yesterday looked like a Lincoln Riley defense. That's what players out of position, missing tackles. Now, they are way too talented, I think, to actually play like that during the season. I think. But that was bad yesterday. That was bad Alabama defense yesterday. Well, I know Nick Saban had to be hating that shit because he was there, roaming around, hovering around like an extra shadow. Refuses to leave. I feel bad for Kalen DeBoer. It's a hard enough thing to do, Kalen DeBoer, to come in to sort of be the guy after the guy, replace a legend in Nick Saban, arguably the greatest college football coach in history, and you have to replace him. That's hard to do. It's even harder to do when the guy won't fucking leave. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the Georgia and Bama spring game. 2 of the best 10 teams in the country, clearly, right? They're going to be in everybody's top 10. You can argue with your mom about where you want to put them in the top 10, but these are going to be 2 really good teams come the fall. The question is going to be, well, I'll ask y'all a question. You don't even have to tell me which ones. How many of these 2 teams, out of Georgia and Bama, how many playoff teams are we getting? Are we getting 1 playoff team out of those 2? Are we getting 2 playoff teams out of those 2? Or is there anybody that thinks we're getting 0 playoff teams out of those 2? I think we're definitely getting 1, and I think it's probably over 50% chance that we get 2. So these are 2 really good teams. Are they going to be as good as last year? Bama made the playoffs and lost in the first round. Georgia was 12-0, lost to Bama in the SEC championship game, barely missing out on the playoffs. That was a 4-team playoff, going to a 12-team playoff next year. Were we watching 2 playoff teams yesterday? Were we watching 1 playoff team yesterday? Or were we watching 0 playoff teams yesterday? Let me know down below and any thoughts you had about the spring games. If you want to hear my thoughts or idiotic ramblings about any other team's spring games from yesterday, let me know down below. Have a good morning.